Nobody's watching the helium ticker. Nobody's panicking about helium futures. There's no breathless cable news segment about the helium gap. There's just a slow, quiet catastrophe building inside the supply chains that make your phone, your laptop, your car, and the MRI machine keeping someone's grandmother alive. And the gas responsible for all of it is the same one that makes your voice sound like a cartoon duck at birthday parties. This is the story of how a colorless, weightless, utterly invisible element became the single most dangerous choke point in the global technology industry, and how the people who knew it was coming filed their warnings, nodded at each other, and then did absolutely nothing about it. The scale of this crisis is genuinely difficult to comprehend because helium's role in modern civilization is so thoroughly hidden. Most people encounter it twice in their lives, once in a party balloon, and once if they ever need an MRI scan. The assumption is that it's everywhere, abundant, essentially infinite. It's not. Helium is the second most abundant element in the universe. On Earth, it's effectively finite. We use it and it escapes into the atmosphere. There's no recycling loop. There's no secondary market. Once a helium atom drifts past the upper reaches of the atmosphere, it's gone forever. What we have is what we extract, and what we extract is nowhere near enough to cover all the uses we've developed for it over the past century. The industrial demand for helium has roughly quadrupled since 2000, and driven almost entirely by the explosion in semiconductor manufacturing and advanced medical imaging. Supply has not kept pace. The industrial reality, the part manufacturers conspicuously omit from the packaging, is far more complex and terrifying. Helium is not a party trick, not industrially, not at the level that actually matters. Liquid helium operates at -269 degrees Celsius. That's 4 degrees above absolute zero. The coldest naturally occurring substance on Earth doesn't get close. At that temperature, helium becomes the only thing capable of cooling the superconducting magnets inside MRI machines and the precision environments inside chip fabrication plants. EUV lithography machines, the $200 million tools that etch circuits onto silicon wafers smaller than a human blood cell, run on helium cooling. You can't swap it out. Masob, you can't dial down the requirement. You can't call a supplier and ask if nitrogen will do in a pinch. It won't. Helium's atomic size, its inertness, its thermal behavior, no other element does what it does at the scale modern manufacturing needs. No helium, no chips, no chips, no iPhone. No iPhone, no anything that runs on a processor, which is basically everything you own. So where does it come from? Good question. Bad answer. About 40% of the world's supply comes from the United States. Russia was a major player until European sanctions made that complicated. Algeria picks up some slack. And then there's Qatar. Qatar produces roughly a third of global helium, approximately 63 million cubic meters per year. Extracted as a byproduct of liquefied natural gas processing at a facility called Ras Laffan Industrial City, the largest LNG complex on the planet. One building, one address, 1/3 of the world's supply of an irreplaceable industrial gas. What could possibly go wrong? In March 2026, Iranian strikes hit Ras Laffan hard. Qatar Energy halted production immediately. 2 days later, they declared force majeure, the legal equivalent of shrugging at every contract they ever signed. Then came more strikes. The damage assessment came back. Extensive. Recovery timeline, 3 to 5 years. Not weeks, years. And whatever helium Qatar could theoretically still ship, it moves through the Strait of Hormuz, which is blocked, so the product that isn't being made can't move anyway. A perfect double lock. Catastrophic and elegant, if you find catastrophes elegant. The geopolitical vulnerability of this single choke point has been understood for years within industry circles, yet no meaningful action was taken to diversify supply. Ras Laffan's concentration of global helium production was not a secret. It was documented in trade journals, discussed in supply chain conferences, and flagged in internal risk assessments at every major semiconductor manufacturer. Yet the economic incentives all pointed in the wrong direction. Qatari helium was cheap, because it came as a byproduct of natural gas processing. Building redundant capacity elsewhere made no financial sense when the marginal cost of Qatari production was so low. Companies optimize for current profitability, not hypothetical future shocks. That's how capitalism works, and it works beautifully right up until the moment it doesn't. The fact that a third of helium supply ran through the same corridor was treated as an acceptable risk because until March 2026, it had always been acceptable. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. TSMC, the Taiwanese company that makes chips for Apple, Nvidia, AMD, and essentially every major technology firm on Earth, burns through roughly 500,000 cubic feet of helium per year at its most advanced fabs. That's not a typo. And Taiwan sourced 69% of its helium from Gulf Cooperation Council countries in 2024. South Korea, home to Samsung and SK Hynix, sourced 55% of its helium from the same region. So the two countries responsible for manufacturing the world's most advanced semiconductors were, at the moment the crisis hit, dependent on the same geographic zone that just lost a third of global production capacity. TSMC is currently burning through emergency stockpiles. They're telling everyone not to panic. That's the reassuring part. The less reassuring part is that stockpiles run out. Air Liquide, one of the largest industrial gas companies in the world, has already used the word global to describe the shortage. That's a French industrial giant reading from a press release, not a blog post. When they say global, they mean it. Prices confirm it. Spot prices for helium surged between 40 and 100% within days of the Laffan shutdown, depending on who you ask and which market they're watching. Bank of America estimated a 40% spike. Phil Kornbluth, the president of Kornbluth Helium Consulting, told CNBC prices had doubled in some cases in under 2 weeks. Now, spot prices are a small slice of the helium market because most of it moves on long-term contracts. So the headline numbers are dramatic, but not fully representative of what buyers are actually paying today. The real damage is slower. It shows up when contracts expire and get renegotiated. It shows up when allocation fights start and chipmakers with the deepest pockets crowd out everyone else. It shows up when a hospital calls about MRI coolant and hears the words limited availability for the first time. Semiconductors, according to Kornbluth, sit at the top of the allocation hierarchy when supply tightens. Critical need, mission, critical application. Medical imaging follows close behind. The party balloon industry does not sit at the top. The party balloon industry gets whatever's left. But medical institutions are already reporting difficulty securing helium allocations for routine diagnostic scanning, which means the real-world consequence of this crisis isn't measured only in processor speeds and smartphone launches. It's measured in healthcare outcomes. A hospital that can't run its MRI machine doesn't diagnose cancers early. It doesn't detect stroke victims in time for intervention. The shortage propagates backward through the entire value chain, affecting institutions and applications that don't usually think about commodity supply disruptions. And here's the part that should make you genuinely angry. This wasn't a surprise. In 2023, before any of this, the American Semiconductor Industry Association formally flagged helium as a dangerously concentrated strategic resource. Too few producers. Too much geopolitical exposure. The research was done. The warnings were written. The reports were filed. The supply chain kept running on a single thread anyway. Some of that comes down to a 1996 law, the Helium Privatization Act, which required the U.S. government to sell off the Federal Helium Reserve by 2015. The logic in the 90s was reasonable. The government had no business running a commodity market, so it sold the reserve. And in doing so, it eliminated the one strategic buffer that might have absorbed exactly the kind of shock the industry is experiencing right now. For decades, cheap, federally subsidized helium suppressed private investment in new extraction infrastructure. No one built backup capacity because backup capacity was expensive and the government was already providing a cushion. Then the cushion was sold. 16 months later, Laffan went dark. There's also a logistics problem nobody talks about. Liquefied helium evaporates. Even in insulated cryogenic containers, it boils off and escapes into the atmosphere within roughly 45 days. You can't warehouse it indefinitely. You can't reroute a tanker and wait for a better geopolitical moment. The clock starts the second it's liquefied, and right now, approximately 1/3 of the world's cryogenic helium ISO containers are stranded in or around Qatar. Getting that equipment repositioned takes a minimum of 3 months. So here's the math. The facility that produced 1/3 of global helium is offline for years. The containers that move it are stuck in place for months. The remaining supply can't be stored past 6 weeks. And the new sources that could theoretically replace Qatari production, Algeria, additional U.S. fields, take years to develop, qualify, and bring online. Chipmakers require purity levels so specific that a new supplier has to pass a rigorous qualification process before its helium can touch a fab. The best-case timeline, assuming the conflict resolves quickly and production at Ras Laffan resumes in some partial form, is still measured in months before the market stabilizes. The production lines are still moving. For now, the delays haven't hit consumer shelves yet, but if this drags through the summer and into next year, you'll feel it first in smartphones, then computers, gaming consoles, and medical devices. The entire consumer electronics pipeline running on fumes, literally, because a gas most people associate with squeaky voices stopped flowing out of the Persian Gulf. The United States, as the world's largest helium producer, stands to benefit significantly from the crisis. U.S. producers are already fielding calls. Prices are moving in their favor, but American production capacity, at roughly 81 million cubic meters per year, cannot immediately absorb 63 million cubic meters of Qatari output. No one can. That's the structural reality the industry has been choosing not to fully reckon with for 30 years. They knew it was fragile. They knew the concentration was dangerous. The supply chain kept running on faith and favorable weather. The weather just changed.